Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this new edition of PHP Sussex. Thank you all for coming. My name is Yannick, and if this is your first time at PHP Sussex, we are a Brighton-based user group dedicated to the PHP programming language and to web development in general. We gather roughly every other month, usually on the second Wednesday of the month. Tonight, we've got two lightning talks and a main talk. The first lightning talk will be given by Andy Broomfield, and it will be about Drupal's latest news. That will be followed by a talk by Joby Harding about Junie, so PHPStorm new AI integration. Then we will take a break, and after the break, we will be back for the main talk of the evening. So that will be Steve McDougall, who will join us online for a talk about the Outbox Pattern and how to implement that in Laravel. So just so you know, we won't be taking any questions after the lightning talks, but if you want to know more and if you have questions, you can talk directly to Joby and Andy during the break or later tonight. Before we do any of this, though, first a reminder that this event is recorded. So if you do not want to be filmed or photographed, please do let us know. And then before we get started with the talks, Cameron is going to tell us a few words about Silicon Brighton, Runway East, and Tilo, who all kindly support this meetup tonight. Over to you, Cameron.
Cheers. Thanks, Yannick. Hey, everyone. My name's Cameron, as Yannick just said, but I work for a company called Silicon Brighton. We host events just like PHP Sussex all across Brighton Hove, based in all the digital tech sectors that you could think of, which I'll be showing our page of meetups shortly. But firstly, you may have seen on the banner just here as well that we've got our flagship event, the Evolve Conference, coming up on the 4th of July. It's going to be a fantastic day of digital tech fun, loads of professionals, loads of local companies sponsoring, and the fantastic thing as well is that tickets are made really affordable. We really want people in the community to be able to come down. So we've put another level of affordability on that. If you put the PHP Sussex discount code in on that ticket link, you get a half price ticket, as well as half of that ticket goes straight back into PHP Sussex. So we can use that for food, drink, venue hire, or maybe additional speaker costs as well, which will serve to be a really useful thing. So it's going to be a brilliant day. It's the 4th of July in Brighton. What's not to love? And yeah, loads of job opportunities there as well, and just general good place to meet people. Speaking about those meetups, other meetups, as well as PHP Sussex, we support loads of different ones, including last night we had a hardware meetup, which is breaking breadboards. John, one of the organisers, has been building an R2D2 unit. So his partner is almost going to divorce him, apparently, because of the sheer amount of 3D printed parts and 3D printers in their apartment. But yeah, so we've got loads of different groups here. If you're looking for something outside of PHP, this is definitely a place to go. Yannick mentioned that we've got a lot of sponsorship, including Runway East this evening, but we are funded primarily by our supporters, which are all local companies that just see the value in building community in Brighton and Hove. All brilliant separately and it's collectively, and we really appreciate them. We're massively appreciative to our sponsors as well, who on a year-by-year basis, they fund what we do, like the live streaming, as well as sort of sourcing all of the venues as well. So we're massively appreciative to them as well. We've got a link tree here. We've got our own Slack channel, which is really useful for communicating. Like if you've got a question after the event, I know PHP Sussex has its own Slack channel as well. There's loads of different channels for events, job postings, just anything that you could think of if you're looking for a career in digital tech in Brighton and Hove, as well as just general ways to socialize with each other and get to know your community better. As Yannick said, also, Tilo sponsor this event specifically. They've paid for all the drinks this evening, so we're massively appreciative to them. They're also one of the Silicon Brighton supporters, looking after all that we do. Sarah from Tilo has also come down to a few events as well, so it's really a company that values the community aspect of everything that we do in Brighton. They are, I think, is this the only slide that we've got tonight? Oh yeah, in the past they've been looking for job roles, I believe, is in PHP, Laravel, and then a few other platforms as well. But they're looking on the hire, at least historically in the last few months or so. So a great company to get in touch with and meet who work there. I think that's me. So back to the main event.
Thank you, Cameron. All right, so yeah, it's time for the first lightning talk of the evening. Andy will tell us about what's new and exciting with Drupal. As a brief introduction, Andy is a technical website technical lead at the Brighton and Hove City Council. They're responsible for the Drupal platforms. So yeah, please welcome Andy for the talk. What's new in Drupal?
Yeah. I'm hopefully mic'd up. Find my mouse arrow. If I play that. Oh, that has gone a bit wrong. Oh, now I'm doing something definitely wrong. Right. Okay. And they're seeing that one. Cool. So I'm just going to start my little clock. So hi, I'm Andy. As Yannick said, I work at Brighton Hove City Council. Last year, I did a talk on local gov Drupal, which is the distribution that we use at the City Council. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the newish Drupal news, particularly focusing around Drupal CMS. Drupal CMS is something that launched in January of this year, and it's essentially an official-ish distribution of Drupal and some contributed modules. And I'm going to pull out 3 kind of features that I think are quite interesting. So I'm going to look at single directory components, new way to style things, recipes, way to share site features. And hopefully if we get time, I can demo a couple of bits of the AI stuff, but I do have my clock running so I can actually check how I'm doing for time. So Starshot was announced in DrupalCon May last year. And this was to try and get Drupal something that is more usable by marketeers, site builders, people that essentially don't have a lot of coding experience, trying to get something that you can get an out-the-box experience straight away, similar to what things like WordPress offer, and also more commercial platforms like Squarespace. So being able to do all this in the browser. Why? Because there's this famous image of the learning curve for various CMSs. As you can see, Drupal has the kind of going over the mountain. Not so much these days, but even when you do get the default installs of Drupal, there's still quite a lot to get set up. So what they were looking to do is get something where you could just create and get set up straight away. So when you go online, you're now directed to try Drupal CMS rather than core. There's links out so you can go and test this with different hosting providers. So you can try it all in a browser. There's even a Mac app you can download that runs a Docker install to get set up and running. But if you want to develop, you've also got it as a composer project. So you can just go composer, create project, Drupal CMS, and that will download all the tools and all the resources you need, and you can get up and running on a local setup. You've also got Drupal core as an option there as well. So Drupal core isn't going away. That's still being actively developed. So if you want to do very customized experiences, things that distributions or various other kind of sites, that's still available as well if you're going to start doing developing work. So this is the install screen when you do get to Drupal CMS. And one of the things I like straight away is it immediately, rather than going into technical stuff, it's asking, what do you want to build? So it's asking, these are some preset recipes that are actually coming with Drupal CMS. And you just tick the ones you want to do, and it will actually go and install all the contributed modules and all the content and configuration needed to get those up and running. And then you just give your site a name. You have the bit of technical work. If you haven't used local settings.php or installing it that way, you can still write this in the browser configuration. And then you create your admin account. And once you do that, you're just going through the setup, and it will just install your site and take you straight to a login screen. And then you've got your dashboard. So that's a more WordPressy like. This is what content we've been editing on. And again, it's got the new modern Gin admin theme, and it's got some default content already in place. So the idea here is that when you have something like Drupal CMS, you're straight away into a website that you can actually use. And one of the future things for this is to include a thing called site templates, which will be a theme, a set of recipes, and some default content. So Commerce Kickstart have recently come out, and they've made a site template so you can get an e-commerce store set up straight away without having to do a lot of configuration. So I'm going to get into recipes. As I said, the things you saw on the front, on the first part of the install, choosing event or blog, those were kind of recipes. And they're also available here through the project browser. So this is some default things that have been downloaded with Drupal CMS. You can also go and download additional recipes. In this example, we have the accessibility tools. So if we click install on that, that will install the recipe and it will install an example demo page. So this is the editorially accessibility widget. And so that's checking things like if your heading's in order, and you've got missing alt tags. And it's given an example broken page, so you can check out the tool straight away. Recipes you can install in the UI. If you don't have in the UI, if you don't have the right tools like Composer and that installed or accessible from your browser, it will give you instructions on how to run these scripts, so you can actually do it in the terminal. And a recipe at its core is essentially, it's a Composer package. So it's a new kind of Composer package called Drupal recipe. They'll install in the /recipes directory of your website. And you use this to sort of say what modules that you are dependent on that you'll need to install. And then the second part of it is a recipes YAML file. And this just says you've got recipes that you're dependent on. In this case, you need a CMS page. You're also instructing which modules you need to install. And you've got an option to change some config. So in this case, it says install the editorially module and install all its config. But then you've got an additional key, which is config actions. And this is just to give you a chance to say, actually, I need to update some config as this installs, because, hey, we might have noticed something. In this case, here's a little element on the page that we just want to have this ignored. So it's going to do that by default. You can also have much more ambitious, much more involved config. So for example, if you apply the AI assistant, you need to be able to choose which provider you're going to use and add an API key. And recipes themselves, they can't run code, I believe. So this is a way of providing a set of inputs. It uses the Drupal form API, but it's just stored in YAML. And then a form will be provided in the browser for your end users to apply the relevant keys. I've also tried this in the terminal, and it does appear when you're using the recipe script, these actually get asked for you as questions as well. So that's kind of useful there. Recipes can't, because they're only installed once, because it's installing some config, you can reapply them, but you don't update them. So once the config installed, it is part of your website. The second thing I'll kind of want to highlight is this thing called single directory components. And this is sort of a newish way of doing some theming in Drupal. A lot of Drupal templates, you either end up with either quite big templates or lots of includes everywhere, or a bit of a mishmash of various things. And then theming, you've got a lot of libraries all over the place. It's kind of can be a bit confusing what you're including. So this is just kind of a way of containering theme elements into components. So you essentially have the ability to embed them. The libraries are all auto-loaded for you, so you don't have to worry about the kind of libraries files you want. And it has this concept of properties and slots. Essentially, if you come from a React world, this should make sense. Essentially, properties is data, and slots is where you can inject markup. So here's a very, very simple example of what a single directory component might look like. You have this hyperlink, and its directory, as its name suggests, it's really just one directory. Everything is named after the component, and all those libraries can get auto-loaded. And what's in it? You have a component.yaml file, and that is just where you set your schema and you just define its properties. So in this case, this link box needs a hypertext reference and a title. So we have those as two properties. And in our template, we just read those two properties. And then from those, to include it, that's all you need in a Twig template. So you include the component's name. The component has the theme name, colon, and then the component name. They are mostly aimed at themes. They can be put in modules, but only themes can override them. Then, yeah, you just pass in the properties you want, and then it will render. Oh. You can also use PHP. You can also use the Drupal render array system to do this as well. And it's a very similar thing. You just say that its type is of that component. And slots is essentially passing components within components, so passing markup. So in this case, you just give the slot a name, and then I found that you do need to use the block syntax in Twig to get this to work. There was some confusion on the documentation about whether that was quite the right way. But in this case, if you take a block, that block can then embed further components inside it. Where this is going to be interesting in the future is there's a thing being developed for the next version of Drupal CMS called Experience Builder. It's kind of a React-based layout tool where your end users will be able to take components and start putting them onto the stage, onto the page. And I think there is a version of Layout Builder that does allow this as well. And yeah, the third thing I just wanted to highlight was the Drupal AI integration. And what I find interesting about this is that it's actually agnostic to which AI provider you're actually going to use. So some providers are like having partnerships with dedicated companies like ChatGPT or Claude. With Drupal, although it will come with those two providers by default, as long as an AI has a provider module, that can be installed and the AI functionalities can start making use of those. So you've got OpenAI, Anthropic. I've been doing a lot of experiments using Ollama, which is a way of running LLMs on your machine. There's things like Microsoft Azure Forge or Azure AI Studio that can also be used. And it has some very simple tools like in this example, we have like some text that we've got, and we can suggest taxonomy terms, so that can find if your content editors can get some quick tagging done. You can also do things like suggest title. Features I quite like are readability. So this is just how readable would this content? Have you got any advice how to make it more readable? And that can be accessed right within the sidebar from editing the site. The other thing I quite like is this chat explorer. This lets you go through the the Drupal AI APIs. So you can actually start experimenting with the models. You can experiment with the prompts. A lot of the prompts that were in use on the previous one for the readability scores and suggesting title, that's available as just config. So you can actually just edit those yourself and have more control over how they are. And you have the scales like the temperature, which just is a thing about how creative you want the AI to be. And if you want to limit tokens because you need to save money. And the nice thing about this is it will also give you the code you need. So if you now wanted to build a module to work with some of the AI, it will give you the pre-built code, so you can actually straight away put that into a custom module and start experimenting. And one last thing on this is AI agents. These are ways you can talk to the site, and it sort of comes in two versions. There's this version which is using a form. So on the content edit form, there can be a generate with AI option, and you can give it a little prompt. In this case, I'm going to create a little record content type to store my music collection. And I can use natural language to describe what I want. And then hopefully it went through and actually generated the fields that I need for that content type. And then I can go through and edit it. and decide what I want. There's also a chatbot version of this, which sort of exists down there, and it lets you talk to your website, and you can do things like, oh yeah, I'd like to create this type, or can you explain this feature? And depending on the model you've got, it can explain things to you, and you can also ask it to go ahead and start doing things. I've found that works well with the pay models like ChatGPT, Anthropic. I've had difficulty getting that to work with Ollama, and I think it's the nature of the prompts needed are quite complicated. So yeah, that was a quick thing. I don't know how I'm doing for time. I've got about 5 minutes. So in theory, I drew. So this is just an example of some of the AI stuff working. So I can do a little summary. And this is actually running through my local Ollama AI. Hopefully. So that can produce a small summary of the content. And I've got the readability. So that's giving me the readability score. And in here, on my AI assistant, I have the option of altering the tone. So if I wanted to, I could change it. And that will write it into there. Actually. But yeah, that's kind of what's new in Drupal. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so it takes a while to it's streaming the response back, but when it's done, that's then available to put straight back into the editor. Cool. Cool. Nice. Do you want to do the swap? Yeah. 3 minutes to spare.
Thank you, Andy. So it's a nice AI integration, actually. It's quite nice. All right, so let's move on to the second lightning talk of the evening. So Joby Harding is going to tell us about his experience with Junie, so PHPStorm new AI integration. Joby is an independent developer at the full stack app company. So yeah, please welcome Joby for his talk, Junie, 4 weeks with PHPStorm new AI.
Thank you. Is this on? Yeah. Excellent. All right, let's start there. Hey, yeah, I'm Joby. I'm a full stack developer. I tend to help companies build applications with Laravel and various front ends. So Junie is the new iteration of JetBrains' AI integration in PHPStorm. Their kind of the editor that we all know and love. And I heard about it. It got released in mid-April, and I saw Nuno Maduro of the Laravel core team doing like a YouTube streaming thing, exploring it. And I realized that I really needed to check it out and see if I could integrate it with my kind of day-to-day work and how that would work, because it just looked incredibly powerful. So I'm going to talk a bit about it and hopefully give you a few pointers if you are interested in looking into it, into using it yourself for sort of real-world work. Right, I need the clicker. So yeah, of course, not legal advice. Obviously, you're going to need to sort of make your own mind up about whether it's appropriate to use for whatever it is that you're thinking of using it for. So the main difference between Junie and the AI that was integrated before, the AI assistant in PHPStorm, and things like GitHub Copilot, is that it is agentic. And what this means is that rather than it being just an input box with a bit of context where you kind of ask a question and get a response back, it actually does stuff on your behalf based on your prompt and kind of can call tools within your code base to explore your code base and actually figure out how to achieve the task. And it does this by kind of creating a bit of a multi-step plan after you've asked it to do something, and then kind of working through it. And it's pretty crazy to kind of watch it do it. So I've got a quick, hopefully this is going to play, a quick recording of, this is Junie on the right, and I'm just kind of scrolling through here where I've asked it to do something, and it's kind of created a plan with some steps, and then actually kind of started to look at the code base, opening files and understanding the structure of what it's going to change and creating edits. Normally this would be kind of happening in real time. This is like a history that I'm just going back through. And it's very cool. It shows you like diffs at each step so that you can review what it's doing. And it kind of gives you a handy explanation as well. And when it's done, it will tell you all the files that it changed so that you're going to need to review what it does. So you can easily kind of access those and go through it. What I'm just showing you here as well is that after it's finished an initial task, you can kind of follow up with different, if you want it to kind of refactor things or you want it to extend functionality, you can just keep this dialogue going within that kind of that context that you started working on. Yeah, it's pretty bonkers watching how it debugs issues that crop up. I've seen it put like dump statements into the code and then run commands so that it can check the output and do things a lot like a developer might. One of the things that I thought was pretty neat about it is that it does ask your permission before. So you get all of this clarity, of course, but it also asks your permission before it runs commands, which is really, really important. A nice feature that they have added is that there's an allow list. So if there are commands which are the same that it's doing. So for example, if you've asked it to write some tests or you've asked it to write some functionality and it's writing tests for those as it goes along, it's going to want to keep calling your PHP unit test. And you probably don't want it to just have to keep okaying with you every time it wants to do that. So you can add that command to the allow list and then it'll just, it won't pester you. But yes, this is really, really important, and we'll kind of touch on that again in a minute. So I used it for, I started using it and I thought, wow, this is amazing. This is totally going to change how I program every day. And it kind of has, but as time went on, I found there are some things that it's really awesome for, and of course, some things that it's not quite as awesome for. So the things that in the last month I've found I lean on Junie for are exploring new ideas. So because it can write code so quickly, stuff that might take you, like an hour or two to like kind of put together if you were hashing out some large scale sort of architectural ideas, it can do in sort of a matter of minutes. So you can throw stuff at it and get it to try things out. You can inspect it, decide if that's the direction you're interested in before maybe rolling it back and then starting to kind of implement it properly. So it's really good at that. I really like it as well for headache-inducing tasks. And what I mean by those are the kind of implementations where it's something that you're absolutely capable of doing, but there's a lot of devil in the details and like little edge cases that are going to be sort of mentally taxing for you to reason through and adjust the code. Junie's really good at like taking a lot of the kind of mental fatigue out of those tasks and kind of leaving you fresher once you've completed that to sort of go on to other things later in the day, where if you'd done it yourself, you might sort of think, well, actually, I'm going to go to something less complicated now to finish the day because I'm kind of done. Whack is perhaps a little unfair, but I found it wasn't so good at like small tweaks, or at least it's perfectly capable of making small tweaks, but it's kind of a waste of time, because when Junie is operating and it's going through the steps and doing all the agentic stuff, it's actually calling back to the API at JetBrains HQ. So it takes a bit of time to do that. So for something small, you're actually better off just to jump in and do it yourself. When you know exactly what you want, I also have stopped using Junie to kind of write code, because it's much more of a kind of massaging process working with Junie, where you'll kind of start it off and kind of have an iterative approach to getting to your end goal. Whereas if you're like, I want these files, I want these controllers written, and I know exactly how I want them to be, it's going to take you more time trying to get Junie to do that than you doing it yourself. And elegant code, it wasn't so great at. And I mean, it doesn't really have to be, because really what it's mainly concerned about is, getting things to work the way that you've asked them to. But I did find that it didn't really do use kiss and dry and things like that we as humans would do, because it doesn't really need to. So that's something to bear in mind. I did quite often have follow-up tasks where it would write me some functionality and kind of duplicate bits of code in different files. And when I was reviewing it, I'd ask it to go back and actually refactor so that those duplicated bits of codes were abstracted into a method or something like that. So yes, be aware of that. When you are working with it, it's really good at figuring out context, but you can also give it more. And this is a really handy way to do it. There's actually like a tool which will set this up for you, like a quick start tool, which Junie will suggest setting this up for you in a new project. You can create a file, a markdown file, guidelines in a .junie folder, which you can commit into your source code, which has a bunch of coding guidelines for Junie and context. You can tell it how you want it to behave, what sort of code styling you want it to use, or what version of PHP and things like that. So that's really worthwhile putting into your project if you're going to be using Junie. And as I sort of alluded to before, I would say when you're working with it, rather than, if you go online, you'll see loads of people kind of using AI and going, make me a to-do app or something like that, right? And it's kind of fun to watch what it comes up with. But if you do that kind of big task and leave it to it, you're probably not going to end up with production code or code that you'll be satisfied with putting anywhere near a production environment. So do those big projects, but do them in the way that you would normally do them if you were writing it yourself. Break it up into small chunks, work on those small chunks with Junie, and get it to help you get there faster, but make sure that you can manage reviewing everything that it does. Because if you get it to build a whole app as well, you've got to review all of that, and it's kind of tough to take all of that on. Yeah, and commit lots. So I commit even more than I usually do when I'm using Junie. So you can roll back stuff that it does from the interface, like at various stages. But what I tend to do is just lob in loads of commits every time it's done something that I'm kind of happy with, that I'm going to refine. I'll just do a whip commit. And then once I'm satisfied that a small chunk of work has been completed, I'll just do an interactive rebase and squash all those commits into one nice atomic commit and give it a sensible commit message. Now we're for time. Okay, so at the moment, of course, it's a JetBrains thing. So it's just in the JetBrains editors. I don't expect it'll ever not be only in the JetBrains editors. But if you are a user of IntelliJ, as I used to be, rather than PHPStorm, because you can use IntelliJ as PHPStorm, be aware that you won't be able to do that anymore if you want to use Junie, because the flavors of Junie are trained for the specific JetBrains products. So if you use IntelliJ, it's going to start trying to, do Java stuff for you, which isn't going to be what you want. A few things to think about as well, which you've probably already been thinking about if you've been sort of looking at AI and things like that. So before I put it anywhere near any real work, I read through all of the privacy stuff from JetBrains and made sure that I was happy with what was going on. So in the Pro AI package, which is what they're currently giving a 30-day free trial on, and I think it's the same for everything, but specifically for that, I read about it. They send inputs and outputs to third parties because their offering uses OpenAI and Anthropic as well, I think, and various other LLM kind of providers, cloud providers, but they require that no training is done on your inputs and outputs as you would want, because you wouldn't ever want, your client's secret code stuff being suggested in other people's code bases. So they don't do any training on inputs and outputs, and they require all of the cloud-based providers they work with to have the same policy. There's another neat thing that you can add, which you can also put into your Git repository, which is an AI ignore file, which I found is like it's basically like a Git ignore, and you can put file patterns in there for files that shouldn't ever be used as an input. So you would put probably like your M files and things like that in there, anywhere where you've got sort of, you might be storing runtime configuration, like, credentials for auth providers or something like that. So you can put those into your AI ignore, and if Junie tries to use it, I've seen it actually do it, it'll get stopped and it'll say, oh, I'm not allowed to do that. So so it does work. Okay, and some other things as well. This is by no means exclusive to Junie. This is a general thing with AI, but you might have heard about it already. There are some kind of grey areas around open source licensing and things like that that are being hammered out in the courts in the US, I think, to do with the fact that these AI models are trained on public code, and that public code might be part of a code base which has like an AGPL license, which has very kind of specific requirements on you if you include that code within your code base. So this is probably would affect you more if you're building something that's like a publicly available open source piece of software. It's less likely to be problematic, in my opinion, if you are doing like private stuff for private companies, and you've got a private code base, and you are also doing your due diligence of kind of watching what Junie's doing, reviewing it, and making sure that it's not just like kind of obviously lobbing in large pieces of code from somewhere else. It does introduce vulnerabilities. So again, I kind of can't say enough, really. You do have to review everything it does. If you don't explicitly tell it to, validate user input, sometimes it doesn't. So you do need to make sure that all of your security best practices are being adhered to when you're reviewing the code and things like that. Don't just trust that the tool will do it correctly. And there's also the possibility that it might just start breaking your code base. And I have actually got an experience from working with Junie when it started to do that. So I put this to remind myself of the example. I was actually like secretly a little bit pleased that Junie was having a hard time when I asked to do it a task which was related to creating some new JavaScript functionality where it had to work with mocks. This was one of those headache-inducing tasks that I didn't really want to do. And so I tried to offload onto Junie. And ultimately what happened was Junie got frustrated because it wrote some code, tried to run the tests, they didn't pass, and it started mocking other things. It went as far as to mock the actual code under test. So all the functionality that was being tested was completely mocked. There was absolutely no value in the test anymore. The tests still weren't passing anyway, and Junie started to then start going through my code base, altering other files in order to get this test to pass, which was actually breaking other functionality because it was just focused on that specific task that I'd given it, which was pretty funny. And I kind of let it do it for a little bit just to see what would happen. But I eventually stopped it because that's obviously not what you want. So you need to keep an eye on it and be ready to step in. So, oh, you can't see it. You can't see there's a background image. It's very, very, okay. Yeah. So anyway, the funny thing was, yes, so it can start breaking your code base. And this reminded me of something that I saw years ago. It was actually some philosopher from Oxford, I believe, was having this kind of thought experiment about AI and how the end of the human race might not end in a kind of James Cameron robots chasing you down the road with a railgun kind of style, and be sparked by something much more kind of inert. And basically they said that imagine that a super intelligent AI has been set the goal of making loads of paper clips for a factory or something. They want to make the most paper clips they possibly can. That it might end up deciding, if it's not given the right kind of parameters, that killing all the humans is pivotal because they might switch it off and because they contain atoms that could be converted into more paperclips. And while it's kind of silly, it did kind of make me think, and especially when Junie started destroying my code base. So this is the New Scientist article that was from. But on that note as well, I'll leave you with this. So this is I think my least favorite feature of Junie, and I think it's worth being aware of it. It's called Brave Mode. I'm not entirely sure whether I would have picked Brave Mode. So this is a button tempting you to let Junie run without any checks. And while it'll probably be all right, I'm not sure that I'd be comfortable switching that on. And also, it does kind of allude to, the possible end. They're kind of putting it there and daring us to press it when it could actually result in something not bad. We could all end up as paperclips. So yes, you should really try it out if you can. It is really incredible. My trial ended a couple of days ago, and I've paid for I've paid for it now, so I'm going to continue using it. It is a really fantastic tool, and it's kind of streets ahead of just using Copilot or ChatGPT as we've been doing so far. So yes, well worth a look. How much? I think there are a few different ways you can do it, right? So I think on its own, it's like 80 quid a year, but I got it with like a bundle of their other products. So if you buy their all products bundle of editors, then it comes with that. So that's what I ended up doing, because I can't use IntelliJ anymore, which is frustrating. But I still need to be able to use like Python stuff for when I have, some clients who have some Python bits and pieces. Yeah, so it's about 80 quid if you buy the AI Pro. On that note, though, it's a little bit opaque at the moment in terms of what you're actually getting. My trial started warning me that I was going to run out of AI kind of credits on my plan. I was using it pretty heavily, but not like crazy heavily. I wasn't like, using it 7 days a week. And yeah, so they do have tiers, but it's very, very kind of woolly what you actually get for that. They don't really give you an idea of like how many tokens and things like that. So yeah, you've got to sort of feel it out a bit at this point. Yeah. And that is that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joby. All right, so we are going to take a short break. So yeah, if you're watching this online, we are going to interrupt the feed for about like 10 minutes, I would say. And then after the break, we will be back for the main talk of the evening. So Steve McDougall about the Outbox Pattern. So yeah, see you all very soon.
Don't mind me just doing a quick test before people come back from beer and pizza, I'm assuming. All seems to be looking good. Yeah, all good from my side.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hello.
Are we on? Right, welcome back, everybody. So yeah, it's time for the main talk of the evening. I mean, it doesn't really need any introduction, but in case you do not know Steve McDougall, he is a freelance API consultant and also a very prolific content creator. He's probably best known as Just Steve King on social media. Tonight he's going to tell us about a very useful tool for API developers, which is the Outbox Pattern, and more specifically, how to implement it in Laravel. So yeah, please welcome Steve McDougall for his talk, Reliable API Calls Without the Stress.
Thank you very much. As usual, it is awesome to be here. I'm just going to dive right in. I've not timed giving this talk yet, as it's a new one, so I might overshoot it. Hopefully I won't overshoot it because you probably all want to get home or go out for beers. But let's dive in. So this talk, you've kind of got to set the scene a little bit more. So story time. Let's all sit down with a glass of milk. So last Tuesday at 3 a.m., Sarah got the call that every developer dreads. Their e-commerce site had processed 847 payments, random number, successfully. But somehow only 312 confirmation emails went out. And customers were panicking, support was overwhelmed. Nobody could really figure out which orders were real and which weren't. The culprit was a simple API call wrapped in a database transaction, something that I know I've done. You've probably done yourself. Most of us do. It's perfectly reasonable to assume that this is okay to do until it isn't. And today we're going to talk about why this happens and how something like the Outbox pattern can save you from your own 3 a.m. phone call. So, introducing the Outbox pattern. Firstly, who am I? I'm Steve McDougall, as previously mentioned, often known as Just Steve King. I am a freelance DevRel and API consultant. I help companies build better APIs and developer experiences. I also help companies connect with their developer communities as well, which is a kind of fun job to have. YouTuber, content creator. I like to share my knowledge and experiences of everything that I do with the internet. I'm a husband. I'm also a father of 8, which is a full-time job in itself. But enough about me. Let's talk about the problem we're here to solve today, right? So let's understand the problem. We've got a database transaction. And within here, we are creating a new order. We're hitting a payment API to charge for that order. And then we're going to use that email service to send a confirmation email to the person who made the order. Nothing really out of the blue going on there, is there? So it's nice and clean and it works. So first, we're creating our order in the database. Nothing controversial, and it's exactly what transactions are designed for. An order is safely stored, and if something goes wrong, it'll roll back cleanly. But then we're adding that payment processing, and this is where things get interesting. So what happens if this API call fails? Well, the transaction will still roll back. No order gets created, and we're safe, right? Actually, maybe. So what if the payment API call succeeds, but the response gets lost in a network timeout? And what if the server processing our payment couldn't send the confirmation back? But now to add more to it, we're going to add email confirmations as well, so that we've got 3 operations that all need to succeed together. But the thing is, only one of these 3 is actually protected by our database transaction. So the payment API and the email service, they're external systems. They live outside of our database, and our transaction can't roll back a credit card charge that already went through. It can't unsend an email that already hit someone's inbox. So what we can think is one atomic operation: create order, charge card, send email. And it's three separate operations that can all independently fail. And when they do fail, they leave our system in kind of an inconsistent state, because our order's no longer in our database, but there's a new order through on Stripe or wherever we might be storing our payment details, and an email's been sent. So where's the source of truth? And it's not a bug in our code. This isn't something that we can fix with better error handling. And this is pretty much what you see as a fundamental challenge of any distributed system. And every time that we call an external API from inside of a database transaction, we're building out this distributed system, whether we realize it or not. We may not own that system, but we rely on it. And who's been bitten by this exact sort of scenario before? I know I have. I've been bitten by this sort of thing more times than I would like to admit. But let's fix it. There's easy way, there's hard ways. Let's just dive in. So the solution is actually beautifully simple if we think about it. We're going to create what's called an outbox. Think of it as a to-do list that lives inside of our database. First, we want to create our outbox model and migration. So what's going on with my slides? I do apologize. Here we go. Okay, so we make a model and we're going to call this an outbox event. Relatively simple. What we're going to do, we're going to create, we're going to add like a ULID, something somewhat simple. For distributed systems, it's actually quite useful because they are naturally ordered by time, which is definitely handy. We've got an event type, which we could cast to an enum if we wanted to, but that might be over engineering. So it's likely something I would do. Then we've got this JSON payload, which is all the data that we need to do the work. And the processed at, which is a nullable timestamp so that we know whether this outbox event has been processed or has not been processed yet. And this leads us on to our eloquent model. So we've got an outbox event, it's got ULIDs, it's got our fillable fields, and then we're casting the payload to an array and the process stat to a date time. So super straightforward. We're casting things, marking things as fillable. The beauty is in its simplicity here. So this single table can handle any type of outbox event that your application may need. So let's go back to our problematic code. And instead of trying to do everything in this one transaction, we just do this. We store our order and our intent to process the payment in a single database transaction. So we can say event type is order.payment_required. Payload is the order ID. It's kind of simple, right? And this is a key insight. So instead of doing the work immediately, we record that the work needs to be done. Both the order and the work item are saved together atomically. And if this transaction fails, nothing happens, no order, no payment event. And if it succeeds, we're guaranteed that both pieces of data are safely stored in our database. And then separately, and this is a crucial part, we have a process that reads these events and actually does the work for us, we're storing this to do, this intent to do additional work in the database wrapped around a database transaction. So we found all the unprocessed events. Oh, wait, I could probably skip a slide. Here we go. So we can get all of the events where the process stat is null. We get a cursor through those, and then we can handle the event and then update the event to have been processed. So we can handle each one and mark it as complete. And if the payment API fails here, not a problem. We can try that again later. And if it succeeds, but our process crashes before marking it as complete, not a problem. We can retry it. The magic is that we've separated storage from execution. That's the key part to the Outbox pattern. The database transaction protects the storage part, and the retry logic handles the execution. We've taken one fragile operation and split it into two reliable operations, and that is the Outbox pattern. So there are edge cases, and there are some downsides to it. I'm not going to lie. So let's talk about idempotency. So what happens if you process the same event twice? There's no correct way to answer that unless you're manually creating your idempotency keys or the API handles that for you. There's minimal stuff that you can do around that one. So we've got to talk about the negatives of this sort of pattern as well, of course. So how would you detect if an API call's already succeeded? What information would you need to store to make it safe? We're talking about failures and how do you handle API calls that keep failing? Ordering. Sometimes a sequence is going to matter. But let's focus on idempotency a second. So is it better to prevent duplicates or handle them gracefully? A lot of these are more of a case-by-case scenario. So let's take, for example, banking. Banking, you want to be more erring on the side of caution here, where if it's just email sending or some other background operation, it doesn't matter if it comes through twice. So they get 2 emails. It happens. Being charged twice for an item compared to getting 2 confirmation emails, the reaction is slightly different. So performance cost of deduplication checks is another thing. So if you're going to be pushing lots of these background tasks into the outbox to send to this API, send to that API, then you want to make sure that you're not duplicating any rights into that database. You don't want to have 2 intents to charge this one card, for example. So let's talk about failures. So you've got to weigh up the business impact of a delayed API call versus a failed API call. In e-commerce, if it's a reasonable sized business, delayed, not a problem. We can handle delayed payments. A much smaller operation, you might have a few more issues. And you've got to learn to kind of distinguish between what I'd call a transient failure and permanent errors. And what I mean by that is a transient failure is a network timeout in making that call, or they had a issue on their side that they need to fix. Like they had a 500 error compared to a permanent error, such as a 422 unprocessable entity, 401, 403, any in that kind of 400 range where there's something that needs to be done. Then when should humans get involved in this process, right? So if I've got a task in that outbox that keeps failing, when should I get involved? If it's going to be a transient failure, then I can wait it out unless it's something that I need to act upon a lot sooner. If it's more those permanent failures, I can jump in. And that's where monitoring and observability tools can really come in and help. Then let's move on to ordering. So when sequence matters. So sometimes the order of operations in your application, it does matter. It doesn't always matter, but there are occasions where it matters. The second operation relies on the first one to have been done. You can build something like this into the Outbox pattern. I obviously didn't cover it. I'm just covering the pattern as a whole, but there are steps that you can take. But if you're going to go that far, you've got to question what the performance cost of ensuring that ordering is. And if there is going to be quite a performance cost, then could you perhaps design your system to be a bit more or kind of order independent at that point? Do we want to look at global ordering or per entity ordering? Okay. So this is where you start to talk about what we call the cap theorem. So you can't have everything, and we've got to look at consistency, availability, and what we call partition tolerance. And what that basically means is it can't be consistent, available, and be partitioned in the data correctly. So you cannot, trying to think of the best way to explain this one is not the easiest. So the reason you would use something like the Outbox pattern and you wouldn't take ordering into account is because you want that consistent behavior and you want to ensure those API requests are actually sent. Let's take that e-commerce example. We want to save the order and save the intent to charge a card. And maybe Stripe goes down. So we want to be able to retry that. We've got that consistent availability going on there. We've also got to think about, is strict ordering really a business requirement or is it a technical assumption? So a lot of the time when we're building these sorts of systems, we're told it's got to be doing this, 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 and this. Now, is that just someone following a technical spec, or is that a really strong business requirement that this must happen in this order, otherwise everything will fail? But then you've got to think about handling the latency that comes with the ordering guarantees as well. So if it is really business critical, you will be taking latency and performance hits. There's no way around that one. Now, performance. Managing a large Outbox table is not going to be easy. So how long do you need to keep those processed events for? Do you want to look at a way to kind of to squash that up and store it in an archive up on S3 or somewhere? You know, every industry's got different legal ramifications. So the answer will be different for everybody. So is that Outbox table suddenly becoming your audit log by accident? And what happens when you have millions of events per day? Do you want to partition that table? Do you want to partition it by time or by entity? Do you want to archive or delete? Do you want to create read replicas for processing? Running multiple processes and coordinating those sorts of challenges, and then monitoring that table growth and query performance. You need backup and recovery strategies that you've got for that large Outbox table, and that hidden cost of eventual consistency at scale. So the Outbox pattern, it's not perfect. It's not for the faint of heart, but it can solve a problem really, really well. So how can we handle this in Laravel? So we want to make a job, and we're going to call it Outbox Process Event Job. Now, for this, we're just going to run a for each. We're going to get all of the Outbox events. We're going to cursor through them, and then we're going to dispatch. Oh, this is a command. I think I've got a couple of things. There we go. We've got a command and a job. So here's a command. So we want to be able to say PHP Artisan Outbox Process, for example, which is where we're going to get all of the Outbox events in a cursor so that we can kind of keep that memory consumption low in case you are getting hundreds or thousands of requests a minute, a second, however long. And then we're just going to dispatch it to the background. We may as well at this point leverage what we've got in front of us. So this is basically just an event processor. What we want to be doing is just kind of grabbing a chunk, dispatching about 30 jobs, grabbing some, dispatching some jobs, and just keep that going. You don't want to do too much logic within this one command. Obviously, you can kind of put some output and say info processing event, and then return success. But then we get our job. And why do we want a job? So Laravel's got a lot of built-in reliability features. So we've got retries, failure handling, rate limiting, and we're essentially just using Laravel's queue system as our retry mechanism for this outbox. It's intentionally simple right now. It receives an event, and you need to decide what to do with that event, right? You might, you got to add your business logic in there, and you might have a match statement that's based on the event type, or use Laravel's event system, or maybe implement a proper CQRS command pattern style. The beautiful thing is that the job will automatically retry if it fails. And Laravel will handle all of the exponential backup, the maximum attempts, the dead letter queue, all the reliability concerns that you might have. And all you've got to do is run this command with a scheduler, or run it manually, or however makes sense within your application. And the point is that it's completely decoupled from your web requests. And that's it. We've implemented reliable API calls in Laravel. We store the intent, we process it later, and just let Laravel handle the hard parts. It is that simple. So that's the Outbox pattern. It's simple in concept, powerful in practice, and surprisingly easy to implement in Laravel. I hope this saves at least one of you from getting that dreaded 3 a.m. phone call about inconsistent data. And more importantly, I kind of hope it gives you that confidence to build more reliable systems. The pattern we've covered today handles 90% of distributed systems reliably. And it's about 20 lines of code. And that's a kind of return on investment I like to see when I'm looking at code improvements. So thank you all for your attention. Any questions, feel free. I love questions. If you don't want to ask out loud, then throw them at me on Twitter at JustSteveKing. If you want to dive deeper, you can always reach out to me on Twitter. If you do end up implementing this pattern in any of your projects, let me know how it goes. And remember, store the intent, process it later, sleep better at night. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you very much for this talk, Steve. Are there any questions? And by the way, if you're watching this online, you can also ask questions via the chat box. I am in the dark. Hello.
You need a light like what I've got.
Yeah. Any questions? No questions? I I actually had a couple of questions, but you answered both of them in the 2 last slides, so I don't have any questions anymore. So very well done. Hey, I'm here.
So I have used this a couple of times within the last year. One of them was working with the Shopify API, doing kind of sort of a data sync engine. This sort of pattern is super, super useful.
Yeah, no, it does sound very, very useful, and yeah, we'll probably use that actually. Right, well, if there are no questions, I think we are going to stop here then. Please let's get another round of applause for Steve.
Thank you very much.
And by the way, Steve is open to new clients, I believe, at the moment.
Yeah, always
You
open
are?
to new clients.
All right, okay. So again, if you want to, hire one of the best PHP consultants out there to help you with your API, do get in touch. But yeah, Steve, thanks again, and wishing you well. And yeah, see you soon. See ya.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so I think we can wrap this up then. I don't really have anything else to tell you. There are a few more drinks and a couple of slices of pizza left. So if you want to hang out for a bit longer, but otherwise, yeah, thank you all for coming and see you all next time. Take care.